Welcome to CLESTalk, Law for Sustainable Cities, a podcast dedicated to exploring the intersection of cities, law, and environmental sustainability. In this podcast, we venture into pressing urban and environmental legal themes. We feature special guests and also spotlight the work of our very own CLES researchers. CLES forms part of the South African Researchers Initiative of the National Research Foundation of South Africa, and it operates under the Faculty of Law at the Northwest University. My name is Lidile Sekwakwa, and I am a PhD researcher at CLES, and I will be your host for today's episode. In each conversation, we unpack the legal and governance tools shaping sustainable urban development. And today's episode focuses on a critically important yet often overlooked issue, which is menstrual health management and its intersection with law, environmental sustainability, and urban development. We are so honored to be joined by Ms Rotondwa Mashige for this discussion. Ms Mashige has over 9 years of experience within the legal field, which includes in academia and legal practice and also international organization. She is currently a doctoral candidate and acting program manager in the Children's Rights Unit at the Center for Human Rights at the University of Pretoria. Throughout her career, Ms. Mashige has worked on a wide range of human rights matters, including the implementation of child protection policies and advocacy initiative aimed at advancing and also safeguarding children's rights. And her passion for children's rights and the protection thereof is evident from the work that she does. Ms. Mashige, welcome to CLESTalk. We are truly honored to have you with us today, and we look forward to this important conversation.
Thank you so much, Lidile and the team. Thank you so much for having me. It's quite an honor to grace your platform, and thank you so much for that amazing introduction.
Okay, without wasting any further time, Ms. Mashige, to set the foundation for our discussion, how do you define menstrual health management? Can you explain to us what menstrual health management means?
Okay, so basically when looking at the concept of menstrual hygiene management, which I might refer to as MHM during the course of our conversation, we're basically looking at the practice of managing menstruation in a manner that protects a person's privacy, protects a person's dignity, and protects a person's safety. So when looking at menstrual hygiene management, it forms an essential aspect of one's reproductive health that makes sure that a menstruating individual can navigate their monthly cycles without any fear of shame, or any kind of health risks. Now, when looking at and closely tied to the definition of menstrual health management, you have core components that, inform how it works, right? So when you're looking at menstrual hygiene management, you're looking at things like access to menstrual materials and supplies. You're looking at access to safe, clean water and sanitation. You're also looking at access to adequate disposal systems. And you're also looking at, which is very important, access to information and education regarding menstrual hygiene.
Oh, okay. Thank you for that clear and helpful explanation. And building on that, why would you say it is important to move beyond viewing menstrual health management solely as a health or hygiene issue?
So when looking at menstrual hygiene management, right, it encompasses a very holistic approach that goes beyond just menstrual products. So in viewing it as more than just a hygiene or a health issue, it's very important because it needs to be looked at as a multi-sectoral human rights issue that impacts nearly every facet of a person's life, right? So an example of why, or how to just elaborate on why it requires a holistic approach, is because, one, when you're looking at menstrual hygiene management, it has a lot to do with a person's different rights and dignity. So it forms, menstrual health forms basically a fundamental right, and the rights such as I spoke about human dignity, I spoke about privacy, bodily autonomy, health, etc., etc. When you're looking at things relating to poor menstrual hygiene management, it doesn't only pose a health risk, but it also leads to, if you look at school-going girls, which is what my research touches on, right? When children or girls do not have enough menstrual hygiene management, they then tend to miss school or even drop out of school. So it touches on an aspect of education. If you look at it within the context of economic participation and empowerment, poor menstrual hygiene management basically would limit the ability of children to participate fully in society, and if you look at it on the inverse, women to participate fully in the workspace, which then obviously negatively impacts local and national economies. Looking at environmental sustainability, viewing it as a holistic view would consider the environmental impacts that menstrual waste has on the environment. And then lastly, but not least, is the social and psychological well-being, right? So the mental impact of menstruation. Like when you think of the fear that a person has of leaking when they're on their period, that causes some sort of anxiety, it causes some sort of stress, and managing those symptoms in public is quite profound. So I think in a nutshell, those are the reasons why I think that we should move from looking at menstrual hygiene management as a health or hygiene issue, but look at it as a multi-sectoral human rights issue that encompasses a holistic approach.
Oh, thank you so much for that. And I also believe that that broader framing is really important, especially when we begin to think about everyday lived experiences in urban spaces. And with that in mind, how do you think city infrastructure, housing, and public facilities shape menstrual health experiences?
Okay, so that's a very interesting one. So if you look at city infrastructures, right, and you look at housing, they typically are centered around the physical stage, right? And when you look at that, these environments are usually designed without considering menstruation. Because I mean, if you're planning city infrastructure or housing infrastructure, the last thing on your mind is menstruation. But they need to, these systems or city infrastructures, housing infrastructures, public facilities need to transform into a routine of including things like menstruation, looking at the stress that they cause, exclusion, and health risks. Now, if you look at most common infrastructures, especially in cities, right? Let's take, for example, in public facilities. You often do not have menstrual-friendly toilets. The toilets will not be menstrually safe in the sense that they probably don't have locks on the doors, no running water, they don't have soap facilities, things like adequate lighting, you don't have disposal bins within the cubicles. So that means that in most cities, and I think we can relate to this, right? You find clean toilets in private establishments or places where you need to pay a certain amount of money. And even in those situations, the services are not, I don't want to say adequate, but are not to the standard of you being able to enjoy the privilege of having to dispose of your menstrual products in a safe way, also having to be able to wash your hands with water and soap, etc., etc. So that's on cities. Now, when you're looking at housing quality, right, it directly dictates how privately and how hygienically a person can manage their period. Look at a situation in either an overcrowded house setting, which we find a lot in informal settings, or if you even look at people that stay in shelters, right? So on the part of overcrowded housing, there would be lack of a private space, one, which is essential for one to exercise menstrual hygiene management, lack of private spaces, which makes it hard for a person to change their menstrual products, dispose of their menstrual products, and also just keep themselves clean. Additionally, in low-income areas, which we find a lot of overcrowding and informal settlements, residents either need to pay for water or travel long distances to get water, which makes water a luxury rather than a basic utility. And I think I also mentioned when I was defining that you need to have access to clean water when you are on your period. So housing also plays a role in this. And then for shelters, if you look at setups of shelters or homes or even people that live on the streets, right? The home environment is often hostile to menstrual needs in the sense that shelter policies may force residents out during the day. So we only offer you a place to put your head on a pillow at night. But during the day, you need to be out there and fending for yourself, right? This means that it cuts off access to the only available bathroom that these people would rely on. Or let me rephrase and say the only available clean, in quotes, bathroom, and forcing them to use public toilets that are often not safe and also not sanitary. So infrastructure basically that ignores menstrual hygiene management often leads to system failures, right? So if you look at without discrete disposable bins in stalls, people often flush menstrual products down the drain, clogs the system, and then it leads to high municipal maintenance costs. So in cities and houses and infrastructure being designed with menstruation in mind, it not only guarantees that rights are protected for menstruating individuals, but it also in turn would save municipalities high maintenance costs because you then try and curb all these challenges that would come as a result of not taking menstruation into mind when you design your cities, your infrastructure, your housing, etc., etc.
Okay, thank you so much for that. And following from that and thinking specifically about urban planning and development, you have already touched on this a little bit. Do you think cities should approach planning and development in a different way because of this?
Yes, I think my answer is absolutely right. I think, like you said, I touched briefly on it. Cities need to start shifting from gender neutral planning to gender responsive design. So you're not saying, okay, yes, we take into consideration this gender, you have the facilities, but you need to respond to the needs of that specific gender. So a gender responsive design. City planners can transform the menstrual experience by integrating certain strategies, right? When they develop frameworks. Like, you know how when cities and towns are being planned, there are certain things that codes that are there, like a building needs to have fire exit, you need to have ramps, you need to have this, you need to have that. The same can be applied in cases of menstruation by having things like mandatory menstrual-friendly building codes to say when you are designing a building in a city, you need to provide private toilet cubicles that have their own wash bins, that have their own soap dispensers, that have disposable bins. And if you can even take it a step further to say that disposable bins must be, you know how in some areas you find bins that say cans, papers, plastic, have the same, like some places even have this a bin for just menstrual products, right? Another way is also integrating menstrual hygiene management into the water, sanitation, and hygiene infrastructure. So planners need to also stop viewing water, access, and sanitation separate from menstrual health, right? Because I think I mentioned that these things go hand in hand. So public spaces such as schools, workplaces, you can even extend it to government buildings, which are public spaces, must already have menstrually hygiene-ready toilets to reduce things like I mentioned absenteeism in school for school children, absenteeism as well for in employment spaces, right? And that would also lead to improved economic participation. The last one would be that if cities could have a decentralized disposal and waste management code. I think I just touched on this, right? Moving away from the centralized trash only system. So this is a dustbin. You put everything that is trash in that, right? 2, creating specific waste streams for menstrual products in order to prevent 1, clogging of systems, and 2, also reducing environmental burden on landfills. Another one that would also be an advantage for implementing such management waste management systems would also be look at the people that carry our trash, right? Just ensuring that they are not susceptible to diseases and all those things that come with them dealing with or touching used menstrual material. So if we have a thing like, okay, in this complex, when we get the bins, the big black bin is for all of your rubbish, but then put your menstrual products in a yellow plastic bag so that they know this is separate from. So it basically, it's that not only takes into account people's health, but also the burden that these waste materials would cause on the environment.
Okay. At the beginning of our conversation, when you were giving us the definition of what a menstrual health management is, you touched briefly on the right that it has to do it has to do with the dignity and all that. I'm trying to think about menstrual health management from a legal perspective. How does menstrual health management intersect with constitutional rights? And a second question to that is, how would you say municipal health obligation, particularly in relation to water and sanitation, intersect with menstrual health management?
Thank you so much for the question. So I will give this answer in the context of South Africa, but I believe that in most countries that have democratic constitutions, the same principles will apply, right? So I spoke about in my definition how we need to move from looking at menstrual hygiene management as a hygiene issue, but look at it as a human rights issue, right? So it intersects with different constitutionally protected rights and also creates municipal duties that are, or rather, there are also municipal duties which create binding legal frameworks on which how states need to support or governments need to support menstruating individuals. Now, on the first leg of your question, right? Although the South African Constitution does not provide for the right to menstruation, like you find the right to health, the right to education, menstrual hygiene management is considered an essential part for the realization of other core rights, like the right to human dignity, the right to equality, the right to healthcare and reproductive health, the right to education, and the list goes on and on and on, right? So in terms of the rights perspective, that's where it finds its basis. And then when you're looking at municipalities, right, we know that in terms of the South African Constitution, municipalities have specific constitutional duties as well as other legislative duties flowing from legislation that establishes municipalities, right? And these duties provide that infrastructure, or rather, when you're looking at these duties, they provide the infrastructure that make menstrual hygiene management possible. So these are duties such as when you look at water and sanitation, right? Municipalities are the number one body, if I can put it that way, that are designated water service authorities. They are responsible for making sure that people have access to basic water and basic sanitation. Now, when you look at water, sanitation, and menstrual hygiene management is a subset of sanitation. So for MHM to be hygienic, municipalities need to provide more than just toilets. Rather, they need to provide facilities that are private, that are safe, and that are very importantly, equipped with clean water and soap for people to be able to wash their hands or themselves when the need arises. Another obligation that is created, which is a legal obligation that the state has, is that states are responsible for the safe and hygienic disposal of solid waste, right? So waste management. So this includes providing bins in public toilets, ensuring that they are regularly maintained to prevent environmental hazards, and so forth and so forth. And then the last one that I want to touch on is the sanitary dignity policy framework that we have in South Africa, right? The 2019 policy that commits the government to provide sanitary products to indigent persons, right? Primarily through schools, but it relies on municipal infrastructure for this program to be rolled out. So basically, in summary, right, when you're looking at the constitutional right and how it intersects with municipal obligations, you look at the right to human dignity and privacy, the obligation on the municipalities to provide private, lockable cubicles in public areas, including schools. When you look at the right to water, the obligation that arises on the side of the state or the municipality is to ensure a consistent flow of not just water, but clean water for hygiene. If you look at elements of non-discrimination, the municipality's obligation there is to ensure that there's an elimination of barriers that would prevent menstruating individuals from accessing social services or things like accessing work services or attending schools for cases of girls. And then lastly, when you look at the right to health, the obligation that places on the municipality is to ensure that they safely manage the disposal of menstrual waste so as to not have a negative impact on people's health. And when you're looking at that, it's not just the health of those that menstruate, but that those that also don't menstruate. Like the example that I gave of the people that carry our rubbish, their health is also affected by the way we dispose of these materials. So I think that would be my answer in another. It's a mouthful, but I hope it covers both sides of the question.
Yeah, it does covers both sides of the question. And now moving along, unfortunately, we cannot escape the reality that menstrual products could also pose environmental challenges, especially insofar as the disposal, as you have already indicated in answering our previous question, is concerned. What do you think cities can do to incorporate such consideration into sustainable waste management and environmental planning? Could you think of any other practical or examples in respect to this?
Yes. So when looking at that question, right, I want to start off by just saying that, okay, look, so when dealing with in order to balance the essential need for menstrual products with the environmental sustainability, cities need to transition from a more linear take, make, waste model to a circular economy approach, right? And this would involve integrating menstrual waste into urban planning rather than treating it as a hidden secondary issue. So it should be part of the planning, right? From the word go. In terms of examples, right, you find, and I want to give just two examples, one from India and one in South Africa, right? So in India, they have adopted what they refer to as the zero napkin. It's called the zero napkin mission, right? And basically here the state has it launched a drive to replace disposal pads with menstrual cups. And they've successfully done that in 2 districts, right? So the state had looked at, okay, look, we have this, we appreciate that menstrual hygiene management is a very essential thing, but we can't run away from the fact, like you said, when asking your question, we can't run away from the fact that it also poses environmental risks. So how can we come up with innovative ways that we can curb, like, yes, offer this, but also make sure that it doesn't affect this. So they have implemented giving menstrual cups. And obviously that means a finance issue, right? Because they can't then tell people to say, no, just go buy the cups. So they give the cups and then people start using them, and slowly but surely 2 of their states then completely are sanitary napkin or sanitary pad free. That does a lot for the environment, because for the benefit of those that don't know, menstrual cups are reusable. So you can use 1 cup for, I think the shelf life should be 5 to 10 years. So you don't dispose of it, you just wash it. So all you need is just water and soap, and it's fine, as opposed to having a sanitary pad that you dispose of every time. The second thing is an example here in South Africa, right? And it's coined as the Sustainable Schools Program that involves social enterprises like Palesa Pads that they basically manufacture high quality reusable pads that last for 5 years, and then they distribute them in schools, and these have replaced the need for disposable pads. And in addition to it being safe for the environment, it also keeps girls in school. So I think those are the 2 examples that I would highlight to say, okay, this thing is not going away. Menstruation is a biological thing, but there are ways and innovative ways that we can come up with in order to ensure that this biological process of life does not have a detrimental impact on the environment.
Okay, thank you so much for that answer. And in conclusion, and also drawing together from everything we have discussed so far, and I also believe that this may even constitute a summary of all your previous answers. But in your view, What would a city that fully integrates menstrual health management into its legal, environmental, and urban development frameworks look like?
Wow, that is me looking into the future, which I hope is the near future. Because I'm very, like, this is my niche, right? So what I'm saying here is basically me looking at, okay, this is what an ideal menstrual conscious city and even world might look like, right? So it would be an environment where the biological reality of, and half, I might be downplaying it, but say half of the population, right, is treated as a public utility rather than a private burden. Like, you know how menstruation is like, oh, don't talk about that. So it would be an environment where it's treated as a public utility. It would be a place where period poverty is structurally impossible because the infrastructure that is in place supports menstrual cycle. And some of the key things that a city that is fully integrated with menstrual hygiene management can have is things like menstrual rights. So like I mentioned, the Constitution does not have the right to menstruation. So you don't have any legal instrument that has the right to menstruation as a right. So having menstrual rights, having access to or menstrual rights and access as codified into law and not just offered as charity, right? Or advocacy principles. Another one would be a non-negotiable building code. So the same way we have codes on safety in buildings, having safety measures in buildings, we also have to have codes that are very strict on making sure that buildings, whether private or public or commercial in nature, must have toilets that are conducive for people who are menstruating to use. So like I've been mentioning during the course of the conversation, toilets that have doors that can be locked, has proper lighting, has wash basins inside the cubicle, has shelves for changing materials. And I mean, in an ideal world, has also menstrual products that are freely available, right? Which then links to the next one, which is the essential menstrual products that are VAT free. So if you notice, if you go into your normal grocery store or supermarket, you pay tax for things like pads. Now, it's a whole Pandora box I don't want to open, but an ideal city that has menstrual hygiene management in place would be one where menstrual products are free from VAT. In cases of informal settlements, it's moving away from having your unsafe pit latrines, not just so in the rural areas, informal settlements, and having modular hygiene hubs like those. You see those rented toilet cubicles that we have when we have events and all those things, moving towards having that. And I think, I can't remember where I saw it, but there's a specific village in South Africa that actually has those kind of toilets, moving away from pit latrines. Another one would be things like having all public trash cans that are designated, have designated discrete sanitary waste compartments. And I mentioned this when I gave the example of how we have dustbins that have cans, tins, plastic. So also having that included in your waste management systems. And the second last one, which is quite important, right, is based on the idea that we can't run away from the fact that menstruation is highly stigmatized, right? So cities would need to have campaigns, initiatives that debunk the myths that are attached to menstruation and promote sustainable products, product literacy, targeting all genders. Key thing is all genders, to dismantle the social stigma that is attached to menstruation. Because you find that it's basically, it's for us to be able to destigmatize this. It's not just targeted at those that menstruate, but also their counterparts, right? And the last one, which is very close to my heart, is I'm sure you picked up from the conversation that I mentioned a lot, schoolgirls and. So I feel like in cities, every school, regardless of whether you are a private school or a public school, needs to have designated wellness officials or wellness rooms that don't just provide for the menstrual products, but also provide for a safe space for children or students who are menstruating to be able to go there and rest. Say they start experiencing severe cramps, or they have some sort of health condition that is exacerbated by them being on their period. So having wellness rooms that provide for that, and also having an officer on standby who, if a student starts their period and they don't have any menstrual products on them, they can go there, they get the help they need. If they need painkillers, they get the help they need, because sometimes the reality is you don't need to go home for the whole day. You just need a few minutes to take some medication, rest for an hour or two, and you can go back to the classroom and make sure that you don't miss out a lot on lessons. So I think I don't want to say ideal world, in the near future, that's what I see, a city that fully integrates menstrual hygiene management, not only in its legal environment, but also in its urban development framework.
Okay, thank you so much, Ms. Mashige. And that brings us to the end of this deeply thought-provoking episodes of CLESTalk, Law for Sustainable Cities. Ms. Mashige, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. Your reflections have powerfully demonstrated how menstrual health management is not only a health issue, but a matter of dignity, a matter of equality, and also environmental sustainability and inclusive urban development. We truly appreciate your time and the important work that you continue to do in advocating or in advancing children's rights and human rights more broadly. And to our audience, thank you for joining us for this episode of CLESTalk, Law for Sustainable Cities. We hope today's conversation has encouraged you to think differently about how cities, law, and environmental governance intersect with everyday lived experiences. And be sure to look out for more episodes of CLESTalk, where we continue to unpack critical legal and sustainability issues shaping our cities. And don't forget to follow our CLES on all our social media platforms to stay updated on our research, events, and future podcast episodes. Thank you for listening, and until next time, bye.